first speaker is Dr. Jenny Oakley. She is a senior planner with the Houston-Galveston Area Council. And Dr. Oakley used to work with us here at the Environmental Institute of Houston. So we're very happy to have her come back and join us. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I just want to give a quick intro because this is the second workshop this year that I've been able to join. And so hopefully I've seen most of you at the first workshop. So I work for the Houston-Galveston Area Council. So that's a consortium of governments for our 13 county region here around Houston. And I'm in the Community and Environmental Planning Department. So we work with federal, state, and local governments to monitor, assess, plan, and study all of our water resources in the region. So to do this, we coordinate the Clean Rivers Program. So the Texas Clean Rivers Program started in 1991, and HGAC has been officially involved since 1992. We are one of 12 regional organizations, so most are river authorities that administer the Clean Rivers Program throughout the state. And HGAC is kind of unique because of this. So our region uses a coordinated approach to water quality monitoring. So to do that, we monitor throughout 4 different river basins and coastal waters in what covers about 15 counties in our region. We also partner with 6 different organizations in our region, and we all work under one quality assurance project plan. So we follow the same methods, we have the same quality assurance requirements so that all of our data can be compared and looked at in apples to apples kind of way. So our program objectives are to provide data for the use in the integrated report, which I'll talk about a little bit later, and identify and investigate water quality issues. We also promote watershed planning, and we make recommendations and engage and educate stakeholders. So the CRP partners in our region currently monitor 319 sites as often as monthly and at a minimum of 4 times a year. This is called routine monitoring, and it's meant to capture the range of conditions a water body experiences. So we sample at regular intervals, regardless of kind of weather conditions. So rain or shine, we're out there taking water samples and recording data. So all of these data are submitted to the state's database, and they're also posted to our website. So I'll kind of show you those resources as well. This is HGAC's Clean Rivers Program website. If you just Google Clean Rivers Program HGAC, this will come up. I've got a lot of quick links here, but the one that I want to show you right now is our Water Resources Information Map, this RIM. And this RIM is kind of an interactive site. This would be a really great site to have your students explore. There's a lot of great kind of self-guided inquiry that they can investigate on this site. You could pose with, specific kind of questions, or they could kind of come up with their own studies or ideas to investigate on the site. So this is our main dashboard. It has a map and it shows you all of our monitoring sites. You can look at different monitoring sites just by the basin that they're in. And if you click on one, it'll populate this right pane over here and tell you a little bit more about the site. And then you can click on this link that will take you to that station page. That's where it's going to give you kind of stats on that station. You can look at data plotted out over the past several years. You can learn more about each of these different parameters. What I really want to show you is this impairments and concerns tab, because it kind of has to do with what I'm going to talk about today. So these are our main uses that we monitor for and assess for water quality. And there's just lots of resources in here. So your students could go in here and explore. They can zoom in and click on individual water bodies to learn more about that water body. And it will tell you if it's meeting criteria or standards for that use. In this instance, it's bacteria. And then it's got some more information over here about why do we care, how can we help. And so you can click on each of these and learn more. So that's just really what I wanted to show you there. Okay, so this year's current issue is non-point source pollution. It begins at home. So non-point source pollution is the nation's leading cause of water quality issues. So it does not originate from a single distinct source, but rather from many scattered and often kind of unseen sources. That makes it a particularly challenging pollutant and probably why it's our main cause of water quality issues nationwide. Typically, we think of non-point source pollution in the medium of water, but of course, it's also in the air and it's in soils. So if you think of something like automobile exhaust, it's an example of an airborne non-point source pollution. But because these pollutants are so widespread, they're so numerous, they're everywhere, they flow throughout the whole hydraulic or water cycle, which connects all of our Earth's ecosystems, the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, and the pedosphere, so land. So because water is the universal solvent, it's what makes it so amazing. It also makes it a challenge because most of these pollutants eventually make their way into our aquatic systems. So overall, most water management is done at the watershed level, meaning we consider the whole system. So the Texas Clean Rivers Act of 1991 mandates that we use a watershed-based approach to water quality management. So the TCEQ, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, partners with river authorities and groups like HGAC to monitor water in all of the 23 river basins and coastal basins throughout the state. So this, is really important because it, for the first time, really made us manage water based on watersheds rather than political boundaries, right? These kind of jurisdictional or political boundaries that might cut right through or actually might be, have the border of the boundary be the river itself. So two different groups are monitoring and, managing a water body to the middle of the water body. And that makes it really challenging to have, good, coherent, consistent plans. These watersheds are broken up into segments and then further into assessment units. So this map right here is the Arroyo Colorado watershed. It's in South Texas. This watershed flows into the lower Laguna Madre, and it's got two different segments. So they've broken it into two different segments. The lower segment here, because it flows into a tidal water body, is tidal. So that's why they kind of have to break that up. There's different standards, there's different things that we monitor for tidal waters versus non-tidal waters. So they've got these two segments here, and then it's further broken down into assessment units. And the assessment units are numbered from downstream to upstream. And we use these different assessment units to kind of break down this sometimes very overwhelming scale of a watershed into kind of more bite-sized manageable chunks. We typically tend to have a site, at least one site in each of these assessment units that we can monitor through time and then identify if there's any trends, there's any changes through time, there's any concerns that are appearing so that we can address that. Using these segments and these AUs, it's really critical to track water quality monitoring results, and that those water quality monitoring data are what are used to identify if a water body is impaired. And I'll talk a little bit more about once a water body gets impaired, what the next steps are and what that process is. But this I really wanted to focus on because this is why the "it begins at home" of our current issue really matters. So we are all part of a watershed, whether it's my home, my school, where I work. Every place is within a watershed. And so the choices that we make can have a larger watershed impact. Watershed boundaries are really critical for managing water resources, for environmental protection, for urban planning, And so I shared this in my last presentation, but here it is again, because I really think it's an excellent tool and it's really important. It's a program called Model My Watershed. On this program, let me see if I can do a quick demo. You can get started and zoom into an area and delineate the watershed by actually just placing a pin on your map. It will use the topography to delineate the contributing watershed to that point. So this is another cool site that your students can get on. They can really explore, they can ask questions, they can try to develop hypotheses and test them. But there's a lot of data here. It can tell us what streams are in this watershed. It can tell us about the different land use within that watershed. So it can populate it. So this is obviously, kind of an urban watershed in Houston, a lot of developed lands. It can tell you about the soil type in that watershed. Let's see here. It can tell you about the sub basins that are located within that watershed. So it can tell you how many animals are in that watershed. Anyway, it's a really cool site to explore and actually can calculate some different models. You can look at storm impacts. You can look at some outlooks, so based on like changes in population and things like that. So another great website. I use this a lot actually in my work. So it's very transferable, very applicable to people that are in this field. So when a water quality impairment is identified, and this is identified through long-term monitoring, we need at least 7 years of data to evaluate to determine if there is a water quality impairment. The state, the TCEQ, does this assessment and then submits for EPA approval on a 2-year rotation. So every 2 years, they do a reassessment of all data that are available in the state for the most recent 7 years and determine if there's any new impairments or there's any changes to existing impairments. They submit that to the EPA. The EPA reviews it, typically makes some comments on it, and then eventually approves that. So for each water body on the list, the TCEQ will initiate often, some of these in combination, these processes for assessment and restoration that are focused on watershed action planning or watershed-based plans. So this is where typically a contractor of the TCEQ, HGAC does a lot of these, works with stakeholders, including local residents and other kind of agency folks and nonprofits. And they identify the causes of the pollution, and then they develop and document and track those impairments. And then they create kind of a tailored action for improvement for that watershed. Then there's also a total maximum daily load, a TMDL program. So for many pollutants, this is a scientific analysis that defines the maximum amount of a specific pollutant that a water body can receive, but still meet the water quality standards. So this is a little bit more of a scientific approach, and it kind of creates something that then a watershed based plan or an I plan can work off of to try to identify what improvements they can make to hopefully get that water body into meeting standards based on that criteria. So an implementation plan tends to kind of be the next step of our watershed protection plans or a TMDL. And that's developed also with stakeholders from that watershed, and it outlines the specific management strategies. And these are all voluntary actions or best management practices that are needed to restore water quality in that watershed. So a lot of times these I plans are developed and, they don't really have any teeth. They're not requiring anybody to do anything, but it's some place that organizations within that watershed then can point to and then seek out funding sources. So you can say, we need some funds to meet these objectives of this I plan. And we know that this is going to work because we've already done that homework. We've done that watershed protection plan. We've done this I plan. We know what the loading is that we need to get this water body to. So you funding this action will help improve that. So it's kind of the framework that a lot of groups use to then actually take action, to bring in funds to make things change. Finally, another thing that TCEQ can do when a water body is listed as impaired is do permit reviews. So they will evaluate all their different point sources and determine if they're exceeding their pollutant loads and determine if changes to those permits or enforcement of those permits will help that water body comply with water quality standards. As we mentioned, the leading cause of water pollution in the nation is non-point source pollution. It's pretty rare that this permit review results in a water body, meeting water quality standards after that permit review. Typically, most of our impairments are due to non-point source pollution. So that's kind of not a usual avenue for making a water body meet the standards. So using this 303D list, you can see all the different impaired water bodies and where they're kind of at in terms of management. So let me show you kind of what this looks like. You can also follow this link to explore the website as well. So this lists all the different segments, the parameter that they are impaired for. So this table will only have water bodies that are impaired. So it does not include any water bodies that are meeting standards. And then it gives this category over here. So these categories kind of give you a snapshot of where that water body is in the process of evaluation. Whether or not it has a TMDL that's approved for it, if there's one underway, and some other kind of specific special cases. So I am going to very quickly also open up. So the 303D list it's an important document. It lists what's impaired and what's being done about it. But to me, the most useful document that I use on a regular basis is actually called this integrated report. So it's the report that actually summarizes the data, the results that then resulted in an impairment for a water body. So I'm just going to open up one of these to show you. This just breaks it down by watershed. This is easier for me because this is the way my brain works. So a lot of info, a lot of data, numbers, codes. So it takes a little while to kind of understand this. But for each of these uses over here, and this is probably really tiny. Let me see if I can make it a little bit bigger. Each of these uses over here, it tells you what method is used to evaluate them, what data are available, and then the most important column over here is the integrated level of support. So this tells us if it's fully supporting, not supporting, no concern. So there's different kind of categories over here. But it tells you the number of times that our samples exceeded that and gives you kind of the date range for those data and that type of thing. So when we're doing these watershed protection plans, we're doing these TMDLs, this is the kind of culmination of all the data that have been collected that we use to have a snapshot of what's going on in that water body. So another great resource, another place to kind of dig in and play around for your students to kind of come up with questions and maybe some hypotheses to test. In my first presentation, I introduced these and some other kind of main use categories on what parameters we monitor to determine if our waters in Texas are meeting these uses. So I just want to do a quick review of that because next I want to go into different non-point source of pollution and then some best management practices for them. So recreational use. It's an assessment of the potential health risk related to activities where people come in contact with waterways. So swimming, fishing, those types of things. And then elevated concentrations of pathogen indicator bacteria. So pathogen indicator bacteria means we can't actually go out and sample every single type of bacteria or virus that could, be harmful to humans. That would be a lot. It'd be impossible. It'd be cost prohibitive. So what they've done is they've identified different bacterias that occur in correlation with where we typically see high levels of other pathogens. So we can just monitor them, and we know if their levels are high, it's a probably pretty good likelihood that there's also other pathogens that are going to be present in that water body because conditions are the same. What's used is E. coli and Enterococcus. So E. coli for freshwater, Enterococcus for saltwater. And when they're present in high numbers, they indicate that there's likely some fecal contamination. There's therefore the potential for disease-causing pathogens in the water. So in our region for HGAC, 44% of stream miles in our region are impaired for recreational use because of elevated bacteria. It is our number one issue that we face in our region, and it's the same most places nationwide, especially where we've got large populations, human populations. Okay, aquatic life use. So aquatic life use measures the ability of a water body to support aquatic life. So this is usually assessed using dissolved oxygen as the parameter. So aquatic organisms like fish and crawfish, they absorb dissolved oxygen in the water through their gills. It's how they breathe. It's what keeps them alive. And there are different water components that affect the amount of dissolved oxygen that's available for critters to use. Things like water temperature, things like dissolved oxygen production, so primary production, biological oxygen demand, so how many other things are using up that oxygen in the water. And in our region, 21% of stream miles are impaired for aquatic use because of low depressed dissolved oxygen. So it's another major one that we look at. And then finally, general use for nutrients. So nutrient screening levels are used to assess and manage nutrient pollution in surface waters. So there's currently kind of 4 parameters that we monitor: total phosphorus, nitrate, and ammonia. Also, there's chlorophyll A, but chlorophyll A is mainly measured in select sites, typically like lakes and bays, large water bodies rather than rivers and streams. So in our region, about 33% of stream miles exceed state screening levels for nutrients. And nutrients, if you don't know what eutrophication is, definitely you should and your student should. And this is our major concern with nutrients. Has negative impacts like low dissolved oxygen. They're definitely related. Also, things like harmful algal blooms, fish kills, those types of things. So it's really important to understand that process. So I'm focusing on non-point source pollutants for this presentation. So we're going to kind of zoom in and look at each of these parameters and list some common non-point source pollutions and some different best management practices ideas. So for recreational use, bacteria pollution is often kind of diffuse. It's often mediated by stormwater, so it's rainfall driven. It's really hard to pinpoint where it came from. And bacteria is also alive, right? So when it's introduced to an environment that it can thrive in, it can really multiply. So it's a living organism, it's moving and it's constantly changing. That makes it really tricky to monitor and then to try to manage. Some common non-point sources are leaking or failing on-site sewage facilities. These kind of failing systems can have just raw, untreated sewage that are really high in bacteria, leach into groundwater, or even run off into surface water. I've learned more than I probably ever wanted to know about OSSFs in the past couple of years, but it's a major issue, particularly in more rural areas where these systems exist, where we have homes that aren't on sanitary sewer, and it requires a lot of maintenance. And so we see failing on-site sewage facilities pretty regularly, particularly in rural neighborhoods. Let's see. Also, malfunctioning infrastructure. So even if you are tied in to a sanitary sewer system, you're on city sewer, your wastewater from your house goes directly to a wastewater treatment plant. There can be cross connections between sewer and storm pipes, broken lines. You can have sanitary sewer overflows, and all of these can release untreated sewage directly into waterways. I did some work in downtown Houston looking at some water bodies that had really high bacteria levels, and we were trying to investigate. We actually walked every single inch of these waterways looking for flowing water to determine, in dry weather conditions, there shouldn't be any water flowing in through these storm water pipes, but there was. And what I saw, here in Houston, we've got clay soils. Everything's always moving and shifting. We're at sea level. And then we've built all of this infrastructure on top of it. So just concrete on shifting soils. And we have these, storm sewers and sanitary sewer lines, and the ground shifts and they crack and they break and they cross connect. They end up draining into one another. And so we found a lot of instances of this. We also have just direct fecal contamination from feces from wildlife, from pets, from livestock that's on the land, and then it's washed into water bodies during storms. So some best management practices. So to keep our waters clean and bacteria free, these are some best management practices, or BMPs. And really quickly, for our purposes for this presentation, BMPs are just techniques or structures or things that are implemented and designed to prevent or reduce pollution. So I think later this morning, Selena is going to be giving a talk in a little bit more detail on some structural BMPs or green infrastructure. And so hopefully she'll show you some examples of some BMPs that they've put in place. They're doing a lot of actual on the ground work there. So things that people can do, best management practices to reduce bacteria pollution: maintain their septic systems, maintain their on-site sewage facilities, inspect them, repair them, replace them, and make sure that there's no untreated waste that are leaking into the soil, into our surface water, to groundwater. Also, report incidents. So quickly notify authorities if you identify a spill or illegal dumping so that they can be contained and cleaned up. So inform yourself about what that contact number is, or there's also online complaint forms that you can fill out, and make sure you've got that information with you when you're out and about. I have been driving along and seen a stormwater manhole that's overflowing with sewage, a lift station backed up, and it caused that leak. That's, a major source of pollution. Called the authorities. They came, they got somebody out right away. They fixed that lift station and they corrected that issue. But if they don't know about it, that could go on for days. Okay, also keep wastewater from backing up. So protecting sewer pipes by keeping what we call fog, fats, oils, and grease, and also wipes out of the drain to prevent clogs and overflows. So a lot of times the number one issue for overflows that the city sees is these types of backups in a line between a house and the sanitary sewer, or in the main sanitary sewer line. So anything that goes down your sink in your house or down your toilet in terms of wipes, they say flushable wipes, there is no such thing. Keeping those things out of our sewer pipes keeps them clean and flowing so they don't back up and cause spills. Also managing livestock, so keeping animals away from having direct access to the water. And then picking up your pet waste. Obviously you're not going to go out and pick up your cow's poop in the fields, but there are things that we can do in terms of picking up pet waste in our neighborhoods. And that's just while you're on a walk or even in your yard. When it rains, all that storm water eventually makes it to our surface waters. So picking up after your pets and then handling that waste properly, disposing it in a trash can. And then there's also kind of mobile waste, RVs and boats. So properly pumping out into pump out stations, and rather than, dumping it illegally. Those are other things that we can do. Okay, next for aquatic life use. These are non-point sources for things that cause low dissolved oxygen and also high nutrients in our water bodies. So soil erosion, so sediment from construction sites or from, farmland and things like that can carry a lot of absorbed nutrients into waterways, but it also increases the turbidity, it can smother plants, it can decrease the light penetration that plants need to produce oxygen for those water bodies. And it can also take with it a bunch of fertilizers, so excess nutrients from agricultural runoff or residential lawn fertilizers, particularly nitrogen and phosphorus here, are carried by that stormwater into water bodies. A lot of organic debris as well, so decomposing leaves, grass clippings, yard waste. When these things are washed into storm drains, they then, when they break down, release those nutrients, and that causes low dissolved oxygen and nutrient pollution. Fecal contamination, manure, those types of things also carry with it a lot. They're very nutrient rich, and so they can also cause increases in nutrients. There's also atmospheric deposition, so everything eventually makes it into our aquatic systems. And so particularly nitrogen is released into the air from power plants and cars and things like that, and then it settles onto land and then eventually into the water from rain. And then, wastewater, of course, whether it's treated wastewater, there are amounts of nutrients that can be released from permitted discharges from wastewater treatment facilities, and also from, the same things we talked about in the previous slide, kind of illicit bacteria sources like failing on-site sewage facilities and backups for the sanitary sewer lines and things like that. So quickly, a brief summary of some of these best management practices to reduce stormwater runoff and nutrient pollution: having pervious pavement, so increasing the infiltration rate from stormwater and reducing how much runs off and goes into our surface waters. There's also things like rain gardens and rain barrels, another way to reduce that runoff. And if they're vegetated, so like a rain garden, those plants actually can absorb the nutrients. They can kind of act as a filter for that storm water before it eventually leaves those systems. Other things like silt fences and storm drain filters, or these bladders like you see in this picture, especially when there's construction ongoing. You might see some of these things deployed to reduce that sediment from making its way into the water body until that site gets revegetated. Planting native plants. So these tend to have really deep-rooted systems. They increase water absorption, reduces erosion, and they're designed to live in our environment, in our climate, in our soils. So it reduces the need for fertilizers and pesticides and those types of things. You can also test your soil and time your fertilizer use. If you do need to use fertilizers, not applying it right before it rains, and making sure you're not over applying fertilizers. Also, properly dispose of your yard waste or reuse it, mulch it, and make sure it doesn't go into storm drains. And then there's things like protective buffers, so vegetated areas, making sure you've got a healthy riparian zone along waterways, a way to kind of interact with any stormwater coming into those waterways, and providing like kind of a natural filter, slows down that runoff, traps the sediment, absorbs pollutants. In the last minutes that I have here, I just wanted to give you some resources that you can share with your students. and use however you see fit. So this is a little checklist that I created that provides kind of steps that everyone can take to reduce their non-point source pollution footprint at home. So this is, again, non-point source pollution, it begins at home. These are all things that all of us can do to reduce our footprint. So it's a good exercise. It was a good exercise for me to put this together. Like, am I doing all of these things? There's also a lot of other pollutants to consider. We don't have time to go over all of them, but I don't want to ignore them. I don't want to pretend like they don't exist. So a lot of these are all, non-point source pollutants that are affecting our waterways, and we really need to consider things like pharmaceuticals, heavy metals, different debris. So we just had a freeze and a lot of areas salted their roads. Where do you think that salt goes? And how does that impact our waterways? I did want to just give a shout out to Nurdle Patrol. If you guys aren't familiar with Nurdle Patrol, it's a kind of a citizen science project where you can go out to typically local waterways and look for these nurdles. They're plastic pellets. It's like pre-production plastic pellets, and talk about a non-point source pollution. Mostly they make their way, they float, they're small, and they make their way into waterways when there are spills or mismanagement in the distribution of these little tiny plastic pellets. So these plastic pellets are what are used to make everything that's plastic, or most everything that's plastic. So they are production pellets, and then they're shipped somewhere, and then that plant melts it down and makes them into water bottles. And then this other plant melts them down and makes them in Tupperware or whatever it is. So in that distribution process, a lot of times they get spilled and they end up in our environment. And so Nurdle Patrol is a kind of cool place. It shows you how to do your own Nurdle Patrol. You can submit data to their website. You can look at your data. You can look at other data that are out there. Another cool interactive site for your students to play with. And if you guys can do a field trip, like go out and do a Nurdle Patrol. I do that with my classes every year. Okay, I also provided this last time, and I think Debbie's going to reshare it. These are some non-point source case studies. So I've kind of got 4 different watersheds with kind of different scenarios. One's a suburban subdivision. One is a very rural farming community. One is a super urban, downtown kind of stormwater issue. And then the last one is more of a lake situation. So, there are 3 different kind of sections in each of these. I give you a quick background about the kind of issue that they've seen in this area, some just local observations. So what do we know about the watershed? And then some kind of questions for students to consider and kind of come up with, what do we think the likely issues are, just knowing what we know, and what are some things that we can recommend to that watershed or to that community to help make improvements in their water quality and issues they're seeing. Also, this presentation will be shared with you, and there are a bunch of resources, a bunch of links here. I would recommend that you share with your students. A lot of them I mentioned within. Some of them are just other things that I just use a lot and find interesting, and I think that you might as well. And then I did provide a couple of success stories or examples or case studies for implementation of best management practices. So what people have done, cities, communities, individuals have done, and how it's worked. So, sometimes a problem like non-point source pollution can be really overwhelming. And, it's our biggest problem to deal with. There's so many sources. A lot of times we can't even see it. And so it really helps to see what others are doing. So we don't have to come up with solutions on our own. Many times we can implement things that others are already doing and that we know works. And there's things that each of us can do to help improve. And I think that that's kind of the real focus of the theme this year, or the main topic this year for Envirothon. My contact information was on my first slide. And of course, you guys are welcome to reach out to me at any time if you do have questions or need any more resources. Thank you guys for your time.
Hello, Dr. Oakley. I did have a question. You talked about the I plan, that it really doesn't have teeth, but that's what nonprofits or organizations go to go get funding for their programs. Who are the usual suspects as far as like, oh, I'm going to go get funding? Who do they turn to?
That's a good question. So typically, the groups are involved in the creation of the I plan. So things like cities or counties, different agencies. It could even be like an HOA. We have a lot of HOAs and communities that are part of these watershed protection plan kind of stakeholder groups. And so depending on what kind of an organization you are, really dictates usually what kind of funding sources are available to you or maybe, manageable for your organization. So the EPA has a non-point source pollution department, and they do a lot of grants for, kind of like cities to implement best management practices, green infrastructure projects to reduce this non-point source pollution from stormwater. So that would be one if you're kind of part of a city or a county or some kind of a local municipality. And then there's, a lot of local sources of funding in the Galveston Bay watershed. We've got the Galveston Bay Estuary Program. So they're a national estuary program, and they have funding opportunities on an annual basis. And they, identify what their priorities are for that funding cycle. But that's just like an example of a local organization. And then honestly, a lot of these kind of smaller projects, and Selena, who's going to give a talk later, is actually, their group is very involved in actually implementing these and doing these projects, going out and getting the funding and creating these green infrastructure or best management practices. And so she would be a great resource for this too. But a lot of times, we've worked with, I just am throwing this out there, but like Wells Fargo. So Wells Fargo has a grant process that they use to fund different initiatives, and we've developed a relationship with them. And so every year they give us some money to repair and replace on-site sewage facilities. So we go out and find areas where there's a lot of really aging, a lot of vulnerable populations, people low income that have a trouble maintaining their systems, and we go out and we replace them or we help them maintain them. It's a full-time job, honestly, trying to find funding sources and full-time job applying for them. And so, it usually comes down to, what kind of municipalities, what kind of structure there is within that watershed that are capable to go after those types of funds. I hope that answers your question and wasn't too rambling.
No, thank you. That was
Dr. Oakley, we thank you very much for the presentation. Again, thank you so much for coming back to EIH and helping us with Envirothon.